My neighbor warned me the day we met. Don't fall in love with me. I thought she was just being complicated. What I didn't know, the woman across the hall was a former financial consultant carrying a secret dangerous enough to uproot both our lives. 3 days after she vanished without a word, she came back and kissed me, and I still hadn't learned to listen to warnings. The elevator in my new building smelled like old coffee and someone's forgotten umbrella. I noticed that before I noticed anything else, before the peeling wallpaper near the mailboxes, before the hallway light that flickered every 4 seconds like it was counting down to something. I'd moved from Seattle to Chicago for a 6-month work transfer, and the apartment listing had used the word charming 3 times. Standing in that lobby with 2 suitcases and a backpack cutting into my shoulders, I was starting to understand that charming was just a polite word for old. I hit the elevator button and waited. My name is Ethan Brooks, 29 years old, UI designer, recently single in the way that doesn't come with a dramatic story, just 2 people who stopped trying at the same time. Chicago was supposed to be a reset. 6 months, a new office, a new city, and then back to Seattle with some fresh perspective and maybe a better haircut. That was the plan. The elevator doors opened, and a woman walked out carrying 4 grocery bags, a tote hanging off her elbow, and a phone pressed between her ear and shoulder. She was mid-conversation, not angry, but the kind of calm that takes real effort to maintain. "I understand what you're saying," she said into the phone. "I just disagree with it entirely." She stepped around me without looking up, set 2 bags down in the hallway, and kept talking. I stepped into the elevator. The doors started closing. Then her bags slipped. Oranges rolled across the hallway floor in every direction, one of them making it all the way to my elevator before the doors shut. I stuck my hand out and caught the doors. She looked up for the first time. Her eyes were sharp, the kind that noticed things quickly. She had dark hair pulled back loosely, a small smudge of what looked like ink on the inside of her wrist, and an expression that shifted from focused to genuinely amused in about half a second. "Hold on," she said into the phone, then looked at me. "You don't have to do that." "You lost an orange." She looked at the orange near my foot, then back at me. "I see that." "I can help with the bags if—" "I'm fine." But she was already picking up the others from the floor, so I stepped out of the elevator and grabbed 2 of the grocery bags before she could argue. She gave me a look, not unfriendly, just measuring, and went back to her phone call. "I'll call you back," she said, and hung up. We rode the elevator together in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, which was strange for 2 people who hadn't exchanged names yet. She pressed 4. I pressed 4. She glanced at me sideways. 304? She asked. 304, I confirmed. "I'm 307, across the hall." She shifted the tote on her elbow. "I'm Natalie." "Ethan." The elevator groaned, then it stopped. Not at the 4th floor. Somewhere between 3 and 4, the whole thing shuddered and went still. The lights dimmed to that weak emergency yellow that makes everyone look slightly unwell. I pressed the door open button. Nothing. I pressed the lobby button. Nothing. I pressed the 4 button 3 times the way people do when they already know it won't help. "Fantastic," I said. Natalie set her groceries down, looked at the panel, and pressed the emergency call button. A recorded voice told us to stay calm and that someone would assist shortly. She looked at me with an expression that suggested she found the recorded voice deeply unconvincing. "This happen often?" I asked. "3rd time this month," she said. "Once I was stuck with my dry cleaning for 40 minutes. The plastic bag made a noise the whole time." I laughed, despite myself. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made you want to say something funnier just to see it again. We sat on opposite sides of the elevator floor, backs against the walls, grocery bags between us. She told me the building super was named Gerald, that Gerald moved slowly but meant well, and that the rooftop had the best view of the skyline if you went up after 9 when the restaurant across the street turned its lights on. 20 minutes passed like 10. When the elevator finally lurched back to life and the doors opened on the 4th floor, We both stood up, gathered the bags, and stepped into the hallway without making it into a bigger moment than it was. She stopped at 3:07. I stopped at 3:04. "Welcome to Chicago," she said simply, and went inside. I stood at my door for a second longer than necessary. That's when I saw them. Two men standing near the lobby entrance 1 floor below, visible through the hallway's half-window at the staircase landing. They weren't talking to each other. They weren't looking at their phones. They were just standing there, both facing the elevator, both watching the floor we'd just stepped off. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself a lot of things that first night. Chicago decided to make a good first impression that week, the kind of October where the air is cold enough to feel clean, but not cold enough to make you miserable, where the city looks like it's been freshly washed every morning, and the skyline catches the light in a way that makes you understand why people move here on purpose rather than just for work. I settled into a routine faster than I expected. The office was a 20-minute walk down Michigan Avenue, which I preferred over the subway because walking gave me time to think through design problems before I sat down at a desk. The creative team was good, younger than my Seattle team, louder, with a habit of turning every meeting into a debate, but I liked that. It kept me from getting comfortable too quickly. What I didn't plan for was how much of my non-work routine started organizing itself around someone I'd known for less than a week. It started with the coffee shop. There was a small place on the corner of Wabash called Perch, not a chain, just a narrow room with exposed brick, mismatched chairs, and a chalkboard menu written in handwriting so small you had to lean forward to read it. I went in on my second morning because it was closest and I hadn't found anywhere better yet. Natalie was already there, sitting at the window counter with a laptop open and a cup she'd clearly been nursing for a while. She looked up when I walked in, registered mild surprise, and went back to her screen. I ordered, found a seat 2 spots down from her, and opened my own laptop. We worked in silence for almost an hour before she said, without looking up,
"The oat milk latte is better than it sounds."
"I got the regular one."
"I know. I'm telling you for next time."
That was it. That was the whole conversation. But when she packed up to leave, she said, "See you upstairs," the way you'd say it to someone you'd known for months, and I sat there after she left, thinking about how quickly some people become familiar. The laundry room came next. Tuesday evening, I went down with a bag of clothes and found her already there, sitting on top of one of the machines, reading a paperback with a cracked spine. She'd dog-eared half the pages. It was the kind of book handling that would upset certain people, and something about it made her seem more real. "You fold your clothes right out of the dryer?" she asked when mine finished. "Is that strange?" "It means you either grew up with someone strict about laundry, or you have a mild anxiety you haven't named yet." I thought about it. Probably both. She smiled at that, a different smile from the elevator one, quieter. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing important, the best late-night food within walking distance, whether Chicago winters were as bad as people claimed, and a brief but surprisingly passionate disagreement about whether airports were interesting or depressing. She said interesting. I said depressing. Neither of us convinced the other. When I went back upstairs, I realized I'd completely forgotten to fold the laundry. The grocery store run happened Thursday night around 10:30. I was picking up basics, bread, eggs, the kind of tired grocery shopping you do when you've been staring at a screen too long. She was in the cereal aisle, holding 2 boxes, comparing them with the concentration of someone making a much more significant decision. "They're the same," I said, stopping next to her. "They're really not." She showed me the nutrition labels. I looked. She was right. We ended up walking back to the building together, through streets that were quiet in that specific Chicago way, where there's still enough city noise in the distance that the silence between two people doesn't feel like silence at all. She asked about Seattle. I told her about the gray mornings and how I used to think the constant cloud cover was depressing until I moved away and realized it had actually been calming. She listened the way some people don't, without planning what to say next. I asked about her. where she was from originally.
Everywhere, she said simply. Boston, most recently. Before that, Atlanta. Before that, Portland. You move around a lot. I do.
By choice? She looked at the street ahead of them.
Sometimes.
That was when I should have noticed something. That one-word pause, the way she answered a partial question instead of the whole one. But the city was nice that night, and she was easy to be around, and I let it go. The rooftop came on a Friday. She'd mentioned it during the elevator situation, and I'd gone up twice already that week on my own. It was exactly what she'd described. A flat tar surface with a low railing, a few plastic chairs someone had dragged up years ago and never brought back down, and a view of the Chicago skyline that looked better every time the restaurant across the street lit up its sign. That evening it was raining lightly, not enough to go inside, just enough to make everything smell like wet concrete and distant food carts. I went up with a coffee and found her already there, hood up, sitting in one of the chairs with her legs pulled up. She didn't seem surprised to see me. We sat there for a while, watching the rain blur the lights across the river. She was quieter than usual, in a way that felt different from her normal quiet. Less calm, more careful. "You move every few months," I said eventually. It came out more directly than I intended.
Usually, yes.
Is Chicago different, or is it the same? She turned her coffee cup in her hands, slowly.
I don't know yet.
I pushed slightly, because the evening felt like the kind where you could. Are you running from something? I said it like a joke, mostly. She didn't laugh. Her expression shifted, not dramatically, not into something fearful, but into something older. Like I'd accidentally said the right thing in the wrong tone, and now she had to decide what to do with it. The rain got slightly heavier. She looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't fully read, somewhere between tired and certain, and then she said it. "Ethan." Her voice was calm, careful. "Don't fall in love with me. I mean it." Not playful, not the kind of thing someone says while smiling. She said it the way you say something you've thought about saying for several days and finally decided you have to. Before I could respond, before I could figure out what my response even was, she stood up, picked up her coffee, and walked back toward the rooftop door. She paused once, with her hand on the handle. "Good night," she said, and then she was gone. I sat there for a long time after that, rain speckling the back of my jacket, the city glittering indifferently below, and a sentence I didn't know what to do with sitting in the center of my chest like something I'd swallowed wrong. Don't fall in love with me. The thing about warnings is, they only get delivered when someone already sees the danger coming. The first morning I noticed her lights were off, I didn't think anything of it. People have lives. They travel, they stay with friends, they leave for the weekend without announcing it to the guy across the hall they'd known for less than 2 weeks. I made coffee, got dressed, and walked to the office, telling myself I wasn't paying attention to what happened with her door the night before. By the second morning, I noticed the packages, 2 of them stacked neatly outside 307, one from a bookstore, one with a pharmacy label. Small things, the kind of deliveries that pile up when someone's been gone a few days. I stepped around them in the hallway, took the stairs instead of the elevator, and spent the commute thinking about a project deadline instead. That worked until about noon. There's something about absence that becomes loud in a way presence never quite is. I'd gotten used to the small things, hearing her door close at odd hours, seeing her light under the hallway gap when I came home late, the occasional sound of her moving around the apartment when the building went quiet. None of those things were dramatic. None of them were things I'd consciously noticed until they stopped. By Thursday evening, the packages outside her door had become 3. I knocked. Lightly, the way you knock when you're not entirely sure you have the right to. No answer. I put my ear near the door, which felt slightly ridiculous, and heard nothing. I went inside my own apartment, sat at my desk, and opened my laptop.
I closed it 20 minutes later without doing any work. Friday morning, I ran into Gerald, the building super, near the mailboxes in the lobby. He was a slow-moving man in his 60s who wore the same gray zip-up every day and spoke with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd seen every possible situation a building could produce.
"Hey, Gerald," I said, trying to sound casual. "Have you seen the woman from 307 recently? Natalie?" He looked up from sorting a rubber-banded stack of mail. "Carter? Not since Monday or Tuesday, I think. Something wrong?" "No," I said, "just checking." He looked at me the way older people look at younger ones when they know something is being understated. Then he went back to the mail. I walked to the office, thinking about the two men I'd seen in the lobby that first night. I'd filed it away as nothing, a coincidence, a trick of the angle, the kind of thing your brain notices and then misfiles. But the image came back to me clearly now. Both of them still. Both of them watching the fourth floor. I told myself there were 100 explanations. That evening, coming home from the office, a man in the lobby stopped me. He was standing near the door to the stairwell. Average height, forgettable jacket, the kind of person designed to not stand out. He asked me if I lived on the fourth floor. I said yes. He asked if I knew a woman named Natalie in the building. Something tightened in my chest immediately. "I know a few people on my floor," I said carefully. He smiled, a patient, practiced smile. "Dark hair, probably 30s, 307. "Can't help you," I said, and walked to the elevator. I didn't look back, but I heard him shift his weight behind me. He didn't follow. When the elevator doors closed, I exhaled slowly and stood there, trying to understand what had just happened and why my hands felt slightly unsteady. That night, Natalie's mail disappeared. I noticed because I'd walked past her door twice that evening, and there had been a small stack of envelopes sitting on top of the packages. By 11 o'clock, when I went to get water from the vending machine at the end of the hall, the envelopes were gone. The packages were still there, just the letters, taken cleanly. Someone had been on the fourth floor. I didn't sleep well. Saturday morning, I pushed back on everything I was feeling and told myself firmly to stay out of it. Whatever Natalie was dealing with, and it was clearly something, she was an adult who had made her own choices. She'd warned me directly. She'd been clear. The most respectful thing I could do was respect the boundary she'd set. I went to the coffee shop. I worked for 3 hours. I had the oat milk latte because she'd told me to. Saturday evening, I was walking back from the train station after going to a bookstore in Wicker Park when I saw her. I almost missed it. The diner was one of those places that exists in every city in a slightly different form. Vinyl booths, a long counter with swivel stools, laminated menus, and a specific quality of yellow light that makes everything feel like it's happening in 1994. It sat between a laundromat and a phone repair shop, the kind of block you walk past without registering. But I registered it that evening because of her. She was in the second booth from the window, facing the door. A cup of something sat in front of her, untouched. She was wearing a jacket she hadn't taken off despite being inside. Her hair was down instead of pulled back, and even from the street, I could see the difference in her face. She looked exhausted in a specific way, not tired from lack of sleep, but worn down from something that doesn't go away when you close your eyes. I pushed the door open and walked in. She saw me the instant I entered. Something moved across her face. Surprise, then something more complicated, then a decision. Before I took 3 steps toward her, she was already standing. She crossed the narrow diner floor in a few steps, stopped directly in front of me, and kissed me. It was brief. It wasn't what I'd been expecting. In the moment, I hadn't been expecting anything at all except to ask if she was okay. There was nothing slow or romantic about it. It was the kind of thing someone does when they've been alone with something frightening for too long, and suddenly the first safe thing they've seen in days is standing right in front of them. She pulled back and looked at me. Her eyes were tired, clear,
but tired. "I'm sorry," she whispered. For a moment, neither of us moved. The diner hummed around us. Low music, the sound of someone's coffee being refilled, a conversation in the booth at the back that neither of us could hear clearly. I had about 12 things I wanted to say. I chose the most honest one. "Are you okay?" She looked at me for a long moment, like she was calculating something. "Not completely," she said. "Okay." I nodded toward the booth. "Then sit down." She studied my face, checking for something I wasn't sure I understood. Then she sat. I sat across from her. The waitress came, and I ordered 2 coffees, and Natalie wrapped both hands around her cup and stared at it without speaking. I didn't push. I just stayed.
Outside, through the diner window, a black SUV sat parked across the street with its engine off. It had been there before I walked in. She didn't explain anything that night at the diner. We sat there for almost an hour, 2 coffees each, the occasional sound of the door opening and closing, and she answered only what I directly asked, which wasn't much. I could tell she was deciding things, running calculations I wasn't privy to, so I didn't press. I told her about a minor disaster at the office involving a misread design brief and a client who'd wanted the exact opposite of what he'd originally described. She almost smiled twice. That felt like enough for that night. When we left, I walked her back to the building. She checked the street before stepping outside. I noticed but didn't say anything. She was back in 307 that night. I could hear the faint sound of her moving around long after I'd turned my own lights off. I lay in the dark and thought about the SUV and the man in the lobby and her mail that had vanished cleanly from the hallway and the way she'd kissed me like someone grabbing a handhold on a steep surface, not out of want, but out of need. I thought about her warning, too. Don't fall in love with me. I mean it. And I thought, with the particular honesty that only comes at 2 in the morning, that I was already failing at that. She knocked on my door the next afternoon at 1 o'clock. She'd showered, changed, and slept. She looked like herself again, or close to it. She was holding 2 coffees from Perch in a cardboard carrier, which I took as a good sign. "Walk with me," she said. We took the red line to Grand and walked east toward the lake. It was a Sunday, and Navy Pier was crowded in that comfortable way, families with strollers, couples, tourists with cameras pointed at the Ferris wheel. The wind off Lake Michigan had an edge to it, but the sky was clear and the light was good, and there was enough noise around us that a private conversation stayed private. She started talking somewhere near the outdoor pavilion, looking ahead rather than at me. "I worked for a financial consulting firm in Boston," she said. "High-end clients, private equity, family trusts, mid-sized institutions. It was good work. I was good at it." I walked beside her and listened. "I was also engaged," she said. "His name was Daniel Carr. He was a senior partner at the same firm. We'd been together 3 years. She said it without visible emotion, which I was starting to recognize as her way of handling things that had a lot of emotion underneath. 8 months ago, I was auditing a set of internal accounts for a quarterly review. Routine, the kind of thing I'd done 50 times, and I found something that didn't belong there. She paused. A series of transactions routed through shell accounts attached to real client portfolios. Small amounts at first, but when I traced the pattern back 18 months, it was significant. Millions moved through accounts the clients had no idea existed. Who was behind it? She looked at me for the first time since she'd started talking. Daniel. I didn't say anything. He'd been doing it for over 2 years, she continued. The accounts were structured to look like routine administrative holds. If you didn't know what you were looking at, you'd scroll right past them. I only caught it because a number referenced a client code that had been officially closed 6 months earlier, a dead account that shouldn't have had any activity. The Ferris wheel turned slowly against the sky to our left. A child somewhere behind us was explaining something loudly to a parent. "What did you do?" I asked. "I didn't go to him directly. I knew if I did, the evidence would disappear before I could do anything with it. So I copied everything: transaction records, account structures, client identifiers, correspondence that connected him to the fake accounts, onto a flash drive. She said it flatly. And then I left.
You didn't go to the police?
I thought about it. She wrapped both hands around her coffee. But the firm had 17 junior employees who had nothing to do with any of it. People with mortgages and families and careers they'd built honestly. If this went public the wrong way, through a fraud investigation, headlines, the whole collapse, they'd lose everything. Jobs, references, professional reputations. None of that was their fault.
I understood the logic, even if I wanted to argue with the risk she'd taken on personally.
So instead, she continued, I made contact with a private legal firm, independent, no ties to the financial industry. They specialize in internal corporate fraud. They agreed to handle it in a way that targets the people responsible and protects the ones who weren't involved. She paused. But it takes time to arrange properly, and Daniel figured out very quickly that I'd taken the records. The people watching you, I said. She nodded slowly. Associates of his. Not dangerous in the obvious way. They're not going to make a scene in public. They're looking for the drive. If they recover it before I hand it over, there's nothing. No evidence, no case, no accountability for anyone. That's why you keep moving. Chicago was supposed to be long enough to finalize the handoff with the legal firm, she said. A few weeks. It's taken longer than I planned. We stopped near the railing at the edge of the pier, the lake stretching out ahead of us, gray-green and enormous. A boat moved slowly in the distance. The warning, I said, on the rooftop. She looked down at the water. I've done this 3 times now in 3 different cities. Let myself get comfortable with someone, let it become something, and then had to disappear overnight because the situation shifted. The last time, she stopped. It wasn't fair to that person. I didn't want to do it again. So you warned me instead? Yes. And then disappeared for 3 days anyway. She exhaled, something between a sigh and a quiet laugh. Yes, I handled that part less gracefully. I leaned on the railing and looked at the water for a moment, working through everything she'd told me. Why tell me now? I asked. She was quiet for a beat. Because you sat across from me in that diner last night and ordered 2 coffees and didn't ask a single question until I was ready to answer one. She looked at me. That's not nothing, Ethan. The wind came off the lake and moved through her hair. Around us, the pier continued its ordinary Sunday afternoon without any interest in either of us. I had more questions, a lot more, but one felt most important right now. The legal firm, I said. How close are you to finishing this? She turned her coffee cup slowly in her hands, the same habit from the rooftop. Close, she said, if nothing goes wrong. Across the crowd behind us, I noticed a man in a grey jacket standing near the entrance pavilion. He hadn't moved in several minutes. He wasn't looking at the water or the Ferris wheel. He was looking at Natalie. I didn't say anything yet, but I filed it away. Nothing about this, I was beginning to understand, was going to go entirely smoothly. The message came at 11:40 that same night. Natalie knocked on my door, still holding her phone, and when I opened it, she turned the screen toward me, without saying anything. The text was from an unknown number, no name, no area code, just 11 words. Someone was in your building today asking which floor you're on. I read it twice. Who sent this? A contact, she said. Someone who's been helping me manage the situation quietly. I trust him. Manage how? He keeps track of movement, people connected to Daniel. She looked past me into the apartment briefly, then back at the hallway. He's never sent me a message like this before. I stepped back from the door. Come inside. She did, and I closed it behind her. She stood in the middle of my living room, still in her jacket, still holding the phone, and I could see her mind working behind her eyes, running options, testing exits,
calculating which version of this situation was safest to move through. "The man on the pier today," I said.
She looked at me sharply. "You saw him?" "Grey jacket, standing near the entrance. He wasn't looking at anything, except you." She sat down on the edge of the couch and pressed her fingers to her mouth for a moment. "They know which building I'm in. If someone's already asking which floor, they'll have the apartment number by tomorrow morning." "So we don't stay until tomorrow morning," I said. She looked up at me. "We?" I shrugged. "You said the contact who sent that message helps manage the situation, but you're the one with the evidence, and you're the one they're looking for. I'm not going to sit across the hall and pretend I don't know what's happening." She studied me the way she had in the diner, running that same quiet calculation. "I have a friend in Milwaukee," she said finally. "Rachel. We went to college together. She runs a cafe near the lake, and she knows enough of the situation that she won't ask too many questions." She paused. "There's a 5:50 train from Union Station." "I can be ready in 20 minutes, I said. We made the train with 8 minutes to spare. Milwaukee in October arrived quietly, the city smaller and slower than Chicago in a way that felt deliberate, like it had decided long ago not to compete with its neighbor 90 miles south. Rachel's cafe sat 3 blocks from the lakefront, a warm, wood-paneled place called Common Ground, with mismatched furniture and a chalkboard above the counter that listed the day's specials in handwriting even smaller than Perch's. Rachel herself was exactly who you'd expect someone named Rachel who owned a lake cafe to be. Easy to talk to, unhurried, with the specific kind of calm that comes from having worked through enough difficult things to stop being rattled by new ones. She hugged Natalie for a long moment when we arrived, looked me over once, and said, "You hungry?" We ate eggs and toast at a corner table while the cafe wound down for the night, and Rachel's one remaining employee wiped down counters. Natalie ate like someone who hadn't eaten properly in several days, which I suspected was true. "You're okay?" Rachel asked her. "Getting there," Natalie said. Rachel looked at me. "You're not what I pictured when she described a neighbor." "What did you picture?" "Older. More cardigan." She collected our plates. "Less involved." Natalie looked slightly embarrassed. "I didn't say that." "You described someone you were trying hard not to like," Rachel said pleasantly, and disappeared into the kitchen. Natalie looked at her coffee. I decided not to make anything of that. 2 days in Milwaukee moved at a pace I hadn't experienced in years. The first morning, Rachel lent us 2 bikes from the back of the cafe, and we rode along the lakefront path for an hour without a destination. The lake was gray and enormous and cold-looking, the kind of view that makes you feel small in a way that's actually relaxing rather than unsettling. Natalie rode slightly ahead most of the time, and I watched her shoulders slowly lose the tightness they'd been carrying since the pier. She laughed twice on that ride, once when I took a turn too quickly and nearly went into a bench, and once at something a dog did on the path ahead of us. Both times it was sudden and real, and gone quickly, like light through a gap in clouds. That evening, we helped Rachel close the cafe, stacking chairs, wiping tables, running the last of the dishes. It was the kind of simple physical work that quiets your brain whether you want it to or not. Natalie moved through it naturally, like she'd done it before, and Rachel put on music, and the 3 of us talked about nothing important until the place was clean and locked. We ate pancakes at midnight at a diner 2 streets away that was open until 2. That was when she started talking, really talking, the way she hadn't before. Not about Daniel or the flash drive or any of it, but about herself. The version of herself that existed before all of it. She told me her favorite movie was Rear Window, Hitchcock, 1954, because the main character is stuck in one place and has to understand an entire world through a single window. And she'd always found that idea both terrifying and oddly beautiful. She told me she hated silence because she'd grown up in a house where silence meant something was wrong. Her parents hadn't been unhappy, exactly, but they'd communicated largely through absence. Rooms gone quiet, doors closed, space used as punctuation.
She'd spent most of her adult life filling rooms with sound to avoid the particular texture of that childhood quiet. She told me she'd been lonely for almost 8 months. She said it plainly, between bites of a pancake, without drama, the way you say something when you've stopped being embarrassed by it. After I left Boston, I didn't let anyone close enough to notice. It's easier to move through a situation when you travel light emotionally. She looked at her plate. It's also exhausting. I know, I said. Do you? Seattle, after the relationship ended. 8 months of perfectly fine, no complaints, everything managed. I turned my coffee cup. It's a specific kind of tired. She looked at me across the table. Yeah, she said quietly. That's exactly it. That was the thing about those 2 days. Nothing large happened.
No revelations, no confrontations, no moments that asked too much of either of us. We biked and worked and ate and talked, and somewhere in the ordinary texture of that, the distance she'd kept carefully maintained began closing on its own. I noticed she'd stopped checking windows every 5 minutes. I noticed it because on the second evening, sitting outside the cafe after closing with 2 cups of tea, she faced the lake directly. Not sideways, not with one eye on the street, and just looked at the water. I could stay here, she said softly. Not to me specifically, to the thought itself. Maybe eventually, I said. She glanced at me. You think this ends cleanly? I think it ends, I said. Clean is a bonus. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked back at the lake. Then, without either of us quite deciding it, she leaned slightly sideways until her shoulder rested against mine. Neither of us moved away. Behind us, the cafe was dark and quiet, and the lake stretched out in front of us, silver and still. And for a few hours at least, nothing in the world was asking anything from either of us. The second morning in Milwaukee, Natalie went quiet in a way that was different from her usual quiet. I noticed it at breakfast, a small place near the waterfront that did good coffee and mediocre eggs, which we'd discovered the day before and gone back to anyway because the corner table had a view of the lake and the owner left you alone. She'd been fine when we walked in. She ordered, looked out at the water, and then somewhere between the coffee arriving and the food, her expression shifted. She unzipped her bag, then she zipped it again, opened a different compartment, checked a small inner pocket twice. What are you looking for? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. She lifted the bag onto the chair beside her and went through it slowly, methodically, the way you search when you already suspect the outcome but need to confirm it before you can accept it. Then she set the bag down and looked at the table. The flash drive, she said. The words landed quietly, but the weight behind them was immediate. It's not in the bag, she said. It's not in any of the compartments. I checked the inside pocket twice. She looked up at me. It's not there, Ethan. I kept my voice steady. Okay, could it be at Rachel's? In the room somewhere? I keep it in that bag, always in that bag, always in the same pocket. She pressed her fingers against her temple. I've carried it the same way for 8 months. So when did you last have it for certain? She thought. Chicago, before we left. She paused, working backward. I checked it that afternoon, after we got back from the pier. After I saw Daniel's man near the entrance, I wanted to make sure it was still there. She looked at me. It was there then. And between that and the train? I packed quickly, 20 minutes, like you said. Her jaw tightened slightly. I wasn't thinking about the drive specifically. I just grabbed the bag. We sat with that for a moment. Rachel's place first, I said. We go through everything properly. Jacket pockets, the bedding, everywhere it could have slipped out. We spent 40 minutes at Rachel's going through the room with the kind of systematic attention that produces nothing but certainty. Every pocket, every surface, between the mattress and the frame, inside both pairs of shoes she'd packed. Rachel helped without asking too many questions, which I was grateful for. The flash drive wasn't there.
Natalie sat on the edge of the bed when we'd finished and stared at the floor. Rachel looked at me from the doorway with an expression that asked how bad this was. I gave her a small look back that answered honestly. "Walk me through the last place you were before we got to Union Station," I said to Natalie. She rubbed the back of her neck. "We came straight from the apartment. I didn't stop anywhere except—" She stopped. "Except?" "The locker," she said slowly. I waited.
Union Station has storage lockers near the South Concourse. I've used one since I got to Chicago. For physical documents I didn't want to keep at the apartment in case anyone got in. She looked up. The week before everything with the pier, I was carrying too much in the bag, and I was nervous about keeping the drive on me constantly, so I put it in the locker for 2 days while I figured out the next steps. She paused. I took it back out. I'm sure I took it back out. Are you certain? A silence. I thought I was, she said quietly. Rachel exhaled from the doorway. I looked at my phone. How late do the lockers close? The station runs 24 hours, but the locker system closes at 10 p.m. and reopens at 6. She checked the time on her phone. It was just past 11 in the morning. We'd have to go back to Chicago. Then we go back to Chicago, I said. We were on the 1:15 train south. Rachel walked us to the station and hugged Natalie for a long moment at the platform entrance. She looked at me over Natalie's shoulder and said, quietly but clearly, "Bring her back when this is over." I nodded. The train ride was 90 minutes. Natalie spent most of it with her arms crossed and her eyes on the window, not seeing the landscape, looking through it at something internal. I gave her the space to do that. About halfway through, she said, without turning from the window, "If it's not in the locker, it's over." "Then it'll be in the locker," I said. "That's not logic, that's optimism." "Sometimes they're close enough." She turned and looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between exasperated and grateful. She didn't say anything, but she uncrossed her arms, and a few minutes later, her shoulder was against mine, the same way it had been outside the cafe the night before. Union Station in the early evening was exactly what you wanted if you needed a crowd. Busy enough that no one looked at you twice, loud enough that conversations disappeared into the general noise, with enough foot traffic moving in enough directions that tracking any one person through it would take real effort. The South Concourse lockers were down a corridor past the ticketing counters, a long row of metal units in 3 sizes. Natalie walked directly to number 41, entered the code on the keypad, 4 digits she clearly had memorized, and pulled the door open. Inside, a sealed envelope of documents, a folded piece of paper, and a small USB drive sitting in the back corner. She let out a breath. I don't think she'd fully released since breakfast. She reached in and took the drive out, held it for a moment, and then looked at me. The relief on her face was so complete it was almost painful to see, the kind of expression that tells you exactly how heavy something has been by the way someone looks when they put it down. "Okay," she said. "Just that." "Okay," I agreed. She reached back in for the envelope and the folded paper. She opened the paper first, probably a note to herself, a reminder of some kind. Her expression changed. She read it twice. Then she held it out to me. It was handwritten in block letters. 7 words. "You should have disappeared quietly." The locker hummed faintly. Around us, the station moved and echoed and continued its indifferent evening business. A family walked past arguing gently about dinner. An announcement played overhead about a delayed departure. Natalie's hand holding the note was completely steady, but her face had gone somewhere else entirely. I took the note from her carefully. The handwriting was deliberate, someone who'd taken their time. It wasn't a rushed threat. It was a considered one, which somehow made it worse. "They knew about the locker," she said. "Yes." "Which means they've been closer this whole time than I realized." The station noise continued around us. I folded the note and put it in my jacket pocket. "The drive is still here," I said carefully. "They could have taken it. They didn't." She looked at me.
Which means they didn't want the drive, I said. They wanted you to know they could have taken it. She understood immediately. A message. A message. I looked down the corridor. Which means Daniel doesn't just want the evidence back. He wants you scared enough to walk away from the legal firm on your own. She stood with that for a moment. Then something hardened in her expression. Not anger, exactly, but the opposite of fear. The face of someone who has just realized that being afraid and being defeated are two entirely different things. He miscalculated, she said quietly. I looked at her. Scaring me just made me certain. She closed the locker door. Let's go home. Chicago had transformed while we were gone. Not dramatically. 2 days is not enough for a city to reinvent itself. But November had arrived with intention. And somewhere between Milwaukee and the South Concourse of Union Station, the season had shifted in that way it does when you're not watching. The trees along Michigan Avenue had gone fully gold and copper. The wind off the lake had found its winter teeth, and the city had put on its outdoor festival lights, the way someone puts on a good coat. Not for warmth exactly, but because it changes how you carry yourself. We came back to the building on a Tuesday evening. The hallway on the 4th floor was empty. Natalie's packages had been moved inside by Gerald at some point, which meant she'd given him a spare key, which meant she'd planned to be gone longer than 2 days, but had also planned to come back. I noticed that and didn't say anything. She stopped at her door and looked at me. Thank you, she said. Not the quick, reflexive kind of thanks, the kind that means something more than the 2 words. You don't have to thank me. I know, she said. That's why I'm doing it. She went inside. I went inside. I sat on my couch in the dark for a while, not turning the lamp on, listening to the building settle around me and thinking about where we were now, in the situation and in whatever it was that existed between us, which had been growing steadily and quietly for weeks without either of us naming it properly. The note in the locker had changed something. It had made everything real in a way it hadn't quite been before, even with the men in the lobby, even with the SUV, even with the diner. Those had all felt like things happening to Natalie. The note felt like something aimed at both of us. I didn't sleep much that night either, but it was a different kind of wakefulness, not anxious, more like alert, like my brain had decided this was no longer the kind of situation worth sleeping through. The next 3 days were careful and quiet. Natalie contacted the legal firm in Boston and moved the timeline forward. Whatever patience she'd been exercising in terms of scheduling was gone now. She didn't share the details, but she told me a meeting was being arranged for the following week, and that after that, it would be over. The way she said over had a specific weight to it, like a door at the end of a long hallway. She worked from her apartment. I worked from mine. We had coffee at Perch in the mornings and took different routes back to the building out of habit, hers, not mine. And she checked the street before going out every single time, which I noticed and respected without commenting on. The man in the grey jacket didn't reappear. Neither did the SUV, which should have been reassuring, but felt more like a held breath. On Friday evening, she knocked on my door. The festival started tonight, she said. She was wearing a dark coat I hadn't seen before, her hair down, and she looked like someone who had made a decision before knocking. I want to go. Is that a good idea right now? Probably not, she said. I want to go anyway. I grabbed my jacket. Chicago's winter festival ran along the riverfront and spilled into the surrounding blocks. Outdoor markets with wooden stalls selling food and handmade things. An ice rink installed on a closed street. String lights overhead in every direction, and enough people moving through it all that the whole area felt warm despite the temperature. We arrived at the market first and moved through it slowly, stopping at whatever caught attention. A stall selling flavored nuts that smelled extraordinary. A table of handmade ceramic mugs where Natalie held one up, turned it over, considered it seriously, and then put it down and moved on.
A small stage where a four-piece band was playing something that belonged to no particular decade, which somehow made it better. We got hot chocolate from a cart near the river. It was good, the real kind, not the powder kind. And we walked with it along the riverfront path, watching the lights reflect on the dark water below. The festival noise softened the further we got from the main market, until it became a background texture rather than something immediate. She was different that night. Not unguarded exactly. Natalie never went fully unguarded, but present in a way she hadn't fully been since I'd met her. Not checking windows, not scanning faces in the crowd with that practiced subtlety she'd developed, just walking, just talking. She told me about Boston in summer, which she'd loved despite everything that had happened there. She told me about a job she'd had at 23, working late nights for a small financial journal, eating bad takeout and learning more in 8 months than she had in 4 years of college. She told me about learning to cook properly during a winter she'd spent mostly alone in an Atlanta apartment, watching the same 3 cooking videos until the recipes felt like hers. I told her things too, things I'd been somewhat careful with before. In that way, you're careful with details about yourself when you're not sure yet how much room you're allowed to take up. I told her about the design work I actually cared about versus the work I did for money. I told her about my family, which was small and scattered and fine. I told her about Seattle in February, which was genuinely the most miserable month in any city I'd ever experienced. She laughed at that, a full one, the kind that meant something. We found the gazebo by accident. It sat off the main path near a bend in the river, half covered by the shadow of a bare oak strung with lights that someone had arranged without any particular plan, but which somehow looked intentional. Inside were 2 wooden benches facing each other, and a view through the open side of the river and the lit bridge beyond it. We sat down. The festival was audible but distant. The river moved quietly below. A light snow had started. Barely there, more an atmosphere than an event. The first of the season. She looked at the bridge for a while. Then she said, "Every time I've started to care about someone in the past few years, I've had to leave before it became anything. It happened enough times that I started thinking the leaving was the inevitable part." She paused. That caring about someone and eventually disappearing on them was just the shape my life had. I waited. "I think I used that as a reason," she continued. "Not just an explanation, a reason for not letting anything get too close." She looked at the river. "Including you." "I know," I said. "The warning on the rooftop." "The warning was real," she said, "but it was also convenient. It let me draw a line before I had to decide whether I actually wanted one." The snow came down lightly between the bare branches above us. "Do you still want it?" I asked. She looked at me directly. "No," she said simply. The word landed quietly and settled. "I'm not planning to walk away," I said. "I told you that on the rooftop." I wasn't ready to believe it then. "And now?" She looked at me for a long moment in the way she had at the diner, but this time without the calculation behind it, without the measuring, just looking. "Now I'm choosing to," she said. The snow was barely there, but it caught the light from the strings above us as it fell, and the river moved below, and somewhere behind us the city was loud and bright and completely unaware of the 2 of us sitting in that gazebo, finally, quietly, deciding to stay. Neither of us needed to make it more than it was. It was already enough. The legal firm's name was Hargrove and Associates. Natalie told me this on a Wednesday morning over coffee at Perch, speaking quietly even though the nearest occupied table was far enough away that it didn't matter. She'd been in contact with them since Boston, nearly 8 months of careful, patient correspondence conducted through encrypted channels and brief phone calls from borrowed phones. They were a small firm, 7 attorneys, no corporate financial ties, and they specialized in exactly the kind of internal fraud that left ordinary people exposed, while the architects of it walked away clean. The meeting was set for Saturday. Boston, a hotel called the Meridian Arms near the financial district, chosen specifically because that weekend hosted a regional business conference that filled the lobby and common areas with enough suited professionals that 2 more people carrying documents and speaking quietly would register as background noise and nothing else. "You don't have to come," she said. "You've said that before," I said. "I mean it more this time. Once this is done, there's no reason for you to have been involved at all. The firm doesn't need your name anywhere near this." "I'm aware." She turned her coffee cup. "Ethan." "Natalie." I looked at her steadily. "I'm coming." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she looked down at her cup and almost smiled. "Okay," she said. We took a Thursday evening flight out of O'Hare. Boston in November was gray and serious-looking. The kind of city that seems to have decided long ago that it has nothing to prove aesthetically and is perfectly comfortable with that. The trees were bare, the streets were damp, and the air had a cold, saltwater quality that Chicago's lake wind didn't quite replicate. We checked into a hotel 2 blocks from the Meridian Arms under Natalie's name and a reservation she'd made weeks earlier under a slight variation, her middle name instead of her first, her mother's maiden name instead of Carter. Small adjustments, the kind that didn't hold up under serious scrutiny, but created just enough blur to slow things down. The room was modest, 2 beds, a window overlooking a narrow side street, a heating unit that worked hard and loud. She set her bag down on the far bed and immediately went through it. Not anxiously, the way she had in Milwaukee, but methodically, checking inventory. The flash drive went from the bag's inner pocket to a small zippered pouch she tucked inside her coat's interior pocket. Closer. "You've done this before," I said, watching her. "The logistics of it." 8 months of practice, she said without looking up. "Does it get easier?" She thought about it genuinely. "You get better at it. That's not quite the same thing." We ordered food to the room that night, and she walked me through what Saturday would look like. The conference started at 9 and ran through the afternoon. Panels, networking sessions, the kind of scheduled chaos that made individual movements invisible. The contact at Hargrove, a woman named Patricia Reeves, senior attorney, would be there as a registered conference attendee. Standard credentials, real ones. She'd booked a session room on the 2nd floor under the guise of a private consultation meeting, which the hotel staff would have no reason to question. The handoff itself would take under 10 minutes. "The documents on the drive," Natalie said, "are encrypted. Patricia has the decryption protocol. Once she has the drive and I've confirmed the transfer, the firm begins the internal process." She looked at the window. "It doesn't go public. It goes through the right channels. Regulatory bodies with confidentiality mandates, the kind that can dismantle what Daniel built without burning down the whole firm around it." "And the junior employees?" "Protected," she said. "That was the condition I set before I agreed to work with Hargrove. It was the first thing Patricia confirmed in writing." I nodded slowly. "And Daniel?" She was quiet for a moment. "Loses everything. His license, his assets tied to the fraud, his professional standing." She said it without satisfaction and without regret. Just fact. "I don't need him to suffer. I just need him to stop." Saturday arrived overcast and cold. The Meridian Arms lobby was exactly what she'd described, filled with conference attendees in business attire, rolling suitcases and laptop bags, the low continuous hum of professional networking. Name badges on lanyards, coffee stations doing serious business near the registration desk. Nobody looked at anybody else with any particular attention. We arrived at 9:40 and moved through the lobby without stopping. Natalie's pace was even and unhurried, the deliberate calm I'd come to recognize as her version of controlled nerves. I stayed slightly behind her, close enough to matter, far enough not to make us look coordinated. The 2nd floor session rooms ran along a carpeted corridor off the main staircase. Room 214 had a small placard outside that read, "Private Consultation, 9:45 a.m." in the hotel's standard font. Natalie paused at the door,
looked at me once. Then she knocked twice and opened it.
Patricia Reeves was already inside. A woman in her mid-50s, dark blazer, reading glasses pushed up onto her head, a leather portfolio open on the table in front of her. She stood when we entered. She and Natalie looked at each other with the specific recognition of two people who have communicated carefully for a long time and are finally in the same room. "Natalie," she said. "Patricia." They sat down. I took a position near the door, not guarding it, just present. The conversation was brief and specific. Patricia confirmed the regulatory contacts were in place and that the process would begin within 72 hours of receiving the documentation. She confirmed the confidentiality terms around the junior employees. She confirmed Natalie's name would appear nowhere in the initial filing, protected source, indefinitely. Then Natalie reached into her interior coat pocket and placed the small zippered pouch on the table. Patricia opened it, took out the flash drive, and held it for a moment with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what they were holding. She looked at Natalie. "This is everything. Transaction records going back 26 months, account structures, and 3 pieces of direct correspondence that link the accounts to Daniel specifically." Natalie's voice was completely steady. "It's everything." Patricia nodded once and closed the drive into her portfolio. 8 months of carrying that thing, on trains and in borrowed rooms and through 3 cities and into a Union Station locker and back out again, reduced in an instant to a small object in a leather folder on a conference room table. Natalie exhaled, not dramatically, just a breath that had been waiting a long time to leave. We were back in the lobby 12 minutes after we'd gone upstairs. The conference moved around us exactly as before. The same coffee stations, the same lanyards, the same rolling hum of professional life conducting itself without any awareness of what had just happened on the second floor. I found that oddly perfect. Some things deserve a quiet ending. Outside, Boston was still grey and cold and damp. We walked without a destination, down toward the harbor, through streets that smelled like old brick and coffee shops, and the particular cold of a coastal city in November. Natalie had her hands in her pockets and her shoulders were down, truly down, in a way I realized I'd never quite seen on her. No one was watching from across the street. No black SUV, no gray jacket. Just 2 people walking through a city they had no particular history with, moving slowly because there was no longer any reason to hurry. "How do you feel?" I asked. She thought about it for a genuine moment. "Like I've been holding a door shut for 8 months, she said. And I just let go of the handle. I looked at her. She was looking at the harbor, the dark water, the distant shapes of boats, the pale winter sky above it. Then she looked at me, and she smiled. Not the quick, deflecting smile from the elevator, not the careful one from the rooftop, but the full, unhurried kind that had nothing behind it except exactly what it appeared to be. "Take me somewhere with good food," she said. "I haven't eaten properly in 8 months either." I laughed. For the first time since I'd moved to Chicago, everything felt exactly the right size. 2 months is enough time for a city to stop feeling like a visit. I noticed it somewhere in December. The specific moment Chicago shifted from being a place I was staying to a place I was living. It happened quietly, the way most real things do. I knew which checkout line at the grocery store moved fastest. I had a preferred table at Perch. I'd learned that the elevator in our building worked better if you pressed the button once and waited, rather than pressing it repeatedly the way impatient people do, and that Gerald the super appreciated it when you held the lobby door open for him, because his hands were usually full and he never asked for help directly. Small things. The kind that accumulate without announcement until one morning you realize you've stopped converting the city into something temporary in your mind. My 6-month transfer had been extended. The office made the offer in late November, another 4 months, possibly longer depending on the project, and I accepted without the deliberation I would have given it 3 months earlier. My manager in Seattle seemed unsurprised.
She said I sounded different on the phone than I had when I left. I asked her what she meant. She said, "Less like someone marking time." I thought about that for a few days. She wasn't wrong. Natalie left Chicago the week after Boston.
She didn't disappear this time. She told me in advance, clearly, the way people communicate when they've decided to stop protecting themselves through vagueness. She needed 2 weeks to go back to Boston properly, to close the chapter that was still technically open there, to deal with the apartment she'd left in a hurry 8 months earlier, and to handle the ordinary administrative weight of a life she'd put down mid-sentence and was finally going back to pick up. She called twice while she was gone. The first call was practical. She'd found a box she'd thought was lost. She asked if I wanted anything from a bookstore she liked near Beacon Hill. She told me Boston was colder than she remembered, and that she'd forgotten how much she disliked the particular wind tunnel effect on the street outside her old building. The second call was longer, less practical. She called at 11 at night, and we talked for 2 hours about nothing with any urgency. Her favorite street in every city she'd ever lived in, a documentary about ocean navigation she'd watched in her empty Boston apartment that had moved her unexpectedly, a question she had about a design principle I'd mentioned once in passing that she'd apparently been thinking about since. I sat on my couch in the dark, the way I had after the first night she'd come back from wherever she'd been, except this time the dark felt different, comfortable rather than uncertain. Before she hung up, she said, "I'm coming back to Chicago." "I know," I said. "I mean, permanently." I was quiet for a moment. Permanently. "I've been thinking about it since Milwaukee," she said. "Rachel told me I had an expression she'd never seen before when we were sitting outside the cafe. I told her I didn't know what she was talking about." A pause. I knew exactly what she was talking about. "What expression?" "Someone who'd stopped doing math," she said, "about whether something is worth it." I didn't say anything for a moment. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago does in December, cold and lit and completely indifferent to individual human decisions. "Come back," I said. "Already booked the train," she said. She came back on a Thursday evening in the second week of December. I was in the hallway when she arrived, genuinely coincidental. I'd been taking out recycling, and she came off the elevator with 2 large bags and a box under her arm, and the specific expression of someone who has made a decision they feel good about. "You planned that," she said, nodding at the recycling bag in my hand. "Completely spontaneous," I said. I took the box from under her arm. She didn't argue. The apartment she rented wasn't 307 this time. It was 304. My transfer extension meant I'd need to move to a longer-term arrangement by January, and there was a larger unit on the 3rd floor the building manager had been holding for me. Natalie took 304, the same apartment I'd been living in since October, the one that had smelled like fresh paint and other people's furniture when I arrived, and had slowly, over 2 months, started smelling like mine. She moved in on a Saturday. Gerald helped with the larger pieces, moving with his characteristic unhurry and quiet competence. Rachel had driven down from Milwaukee for the weekend. I'd met her twice since that first night at Common Ground, and she'd decided, somewhere along the way, that I was acceptable, which she communicated through the specific medium of talking to me directly rather than around me. By mid-afternoon, the furniture was arranged, and the boxes were mostly opened, and the apartment had started its transition from empty space to inhabited place. Rachel left at 5 for the drive back north. Gerald went home at the same time with the particular satisfaction of a man who has moved something heavy and done it well. Natalie and I sat on the floor of her new living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and takeout containers from the Thai place 3 blocks away that we'd discovered together in November and had been back to 6 times since. The apartment looked like hers already. Small things on surfaces, the ceramic mug she'd almost bought at the Winter Festival and then gone back for the next day. A framed print she'd described in Boston and that had been in the box under her arm when she arrived. A small stack of books with cracked spines that she clearly read rather than displayed.
The window overlooked the street below, and the December evening outside was doing its full performance. Street lights, light snow, the orange glow of the city reflecting off low clouds the way Chicago does in winter, which makes the whole sky look warm even when the temperature doesn't agree. I looked at the window for a moment, then at the apartment, then at her.
"Can I ask you something?" She was unwrapping something from newspaper. "You're going to anyway?" "Why this apartment specifically?" I said. "You could have taken something larger. There's a 2-bedroom on the 2nd floor that's been empty since November." She kept unwrapping, setting a small object on the windowsill, a smooth, dark stone, the kind you pick up from a lakeside without entirely knowing why, and keep forever. "I saw it when I came to look at the building the first time," she said, "before I even moved in originally. 304. I thought, this one." She set the stone down and looked at it. "I don't always know why I think things. I just thought it."
"That's not really an answer," I said. She looked at me.
"Because this is where I met you," she said. Simply. No performance in it, no careful framing, just a sentence that meant exactly what it said and didn't need anything added to it. Outside, the snow came down lightly, the same kind as the night at the gazebo, more atmosphere than event, the sort of snow that makes a city look like it's being careful with itself. I thought about the elevator, the oranges rolling across the lobby floor, the flickering hallway light, 2 suitcases and a backpack, and a 6-month plan that had quietly become something else entirely. I thought about warnings, and how sometimes they're less about stopping something than about making sure it happens honestly. I thought about how much had fit into 4 months, how much distance had been covered, and how much had stayed perfectly, stubbornly still. The building settled around us with its familiar sounds, the elevator, the old pipes, Gerald's footsteps somewhere below moving at their unhurried pace. The hallway light outside the door probably still flickered every 4 seconds. Some things about a place don't change, and eventually you stop wanting them to. Natalie reached over and stole the last piece of my takeout without asking. "You were going to leave that," she said. "I wasn't," I said. She ate it anyway. And in the warm, unhurried quiet of apartment 304, with the snow outside and the city glowing and everything finally, genuinely still, that was more than enough.